Thank you again, Veronica, for the opportunity to host you guys. It's always a pleasure and an honor, and it gives me a reason why to deploy IPv6. I'm just like you, an IPv6 evangelist, but I had to take a back seat and actually be the requester, not the implementer in this case. And this is the journey I'm going to take you through. Now, this is going to be a little bit less technical. This is part of Veronica's fault. It's a challenge she placed on me last year, which was, how do I talk about the business side of IPv6? Because guess what? We're all nerds. We don't really talk about that side of the house. So this year I decided to continue on my own that journey, and I'm going to walk you through it. And there's going to be a few lessons learned throughout. So second, few housekeeping. These are only my opinions, not the opinions of my employer, so let's just get that out of the way. Second, this is a little bit of the agenda we're going to go through. I don't have a specific place where I'm going to talk about lessons learned, but you will see them throughout the whole journey. So just keep an eye out for them. So let's get started. So, as mentioned, this is not a technical talk. Yes, I will mention IPv6 in a sentence and stuff like that. There's plenty of other V6 technical talks out there, NANOG, IETF. Well, the same lessons that we learn in the deployment here are the same lessons you've heard everywhere. Some stuff works, some stuff breaks, people are resistant to change. Again, nothing new here. So that's why I wanted to take a different approach to this and tell you a little bit of behind the scenes from the business perspective. So let's keep going. So how do we get here? So first of all, it started with Veronica. She did not approve me using her face, but here it is. I met Veronica many years ago in 2017 at the IPv6 North America Summit at LinkedIn headquarters, which is a very similar event to this, just focusing more on North America. She worked at Cisco. I was at Cisco. Oh, Microsoft, sorry. 2017 is Microsoft. She did work at Cisco at some point. But we stayed in touch ever since. I mean, the IPv6 group is the same 20 people from 20 years ago, but hopefully it's growing. We have 80 in here now. So we're growing in numbers slowly but surely. Then fast forward 2023, I moved to Amsterdam, and I said, hey, I'm close by. What can we do together? And then she said, hey, you want to come speak? I'm like, damn it, I'm on the hook. And that's where I did that very uncomfortable business side of the house type of conversation from last week. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, the recordings online, feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, is welcome. Sunday, she said, hey, I need a place to host this event. I said, hey, let me see, how hard could it be? Well, as you guys saw me today, I just became the janitor, the food organizer, and the escort for the building. Little did I know I had to do that in the last 24 hours, but here we are. Next, we had to do some testing. And when I say we, it's really me. Because as you know, this is a big layer 8 problem. Deploying IPv6, yeah, there's a technical side to it, but it's more of a layer 8. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more throughout the presentation. But I have to get people comfortable with it. Next, we actually provided how do we do this? And I'll give you more insights. Then we did RFC 81A06. So for those of you who don't know the RFCs by heart, this is just pretty much RA Slack options for DNS-v6, which is a wish that we asked our own developers so we can host this venue and be more comfortable with it. And last but not least, we're here to today. So I will do a live demo to see how much of you guys are paying attention and who's on the network. So just a little disclaimer, pay attention, because we will see your traffic and we will know who you are. So how did this get started? Well, very simple request. I need IPv6 for the guest network. Nothing hard about that. But let's unpack this a little bit from a layer 8 perspective. So first of all, I was very targeted. I need it on the guest network. I didn't say, hey, let's go deploy IPv6 massively all across Cisco's networks, because they were going to shut that ticket down really quickly. So I said, guest network, very targeted. So this is one way you start getting people to actually listen to you. Don't overwhelm them. Next, I started requesting things with a purpose. Why do I want it? It goes back to that talk from last year, which is tying business to V6 and why we're here. And I'm going to unpack this a little bit more as well. And last but not least, never miss out an opportunity to mentor and guide others. I see 80 people in this room. I see you, all you guys as V6 mentors and experts that can help and lean on each other, because the IPv6 community is still relatively small. We need to help spread the word. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know there's not many of us, but we need to grow in numbers. Just like Linux took over every business, well, it didn't start by, hey, let's just do Linux in the business. It started out by the tinkerers, the people that are playing around with stuff in their homes, and then it slowly went into the business. Well, I view V6 in a similar manner. I mean, the question that Graham just asked earlier about, hey, how do we get a static V6 at home? Well, you guys are the tinkerers now. Same road that we could follow from the Linux community. Well, let's unpack why do we want to do V6 on a network. First of all, we are in a Cisco Meraki office, which means everything that we do in these offices is available for demos. Now, Cisco, yes, it's a sales-driven organization, one part of it. So we always demo what our platform look like, because it's awesome to see a platform come to life than just talk about it in a PowerPoint. PowerPoint gets you only so far. That's why I'm going to do a live demo later on today. Next, let me see. Is this working? Next. Well, we're adding a lot of IPv6 support in all of our platforms. So yes, Cisco's been at the forefront of IPv6. Not every platform has been on board. So this is one way to encourage our developers, hey, we're hosting this thing. What can we show off? So that's one way to get them to not be lazy. And I know this is being recorded, so. Next, an opportunity for training and development. Our offices are run by traditional IT organizations, which means they're the typical, hey, I don't want to do it, IPv6 is difficult, every excuse that we've seen under the sun. That happened here. That's why we started this request over a year ago, and we barely got it to the finish line, just last night. Partially. And last but not least, improve user experience, and I'm going to go on a tangent here later on in the presentation. Second item, remember that purpose of why I made the request? Well, Cisco is also has a corporate responsibility item. I mean, pretty much any company that is publicly traded has an ESG kind of a metric. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to change the lives of 1 billion people. So we start off with, how can V6 change the lives of others? So this is one of the excuses that we use to host this event and to be here and influence not just you guys in here, but whoever's going to be watching these recordings later on. So match business with purpose. And in between, we have IPv6 underneath the hood. That's just how we do it. All right, let's get a little bit deeper into this thing. So let's describe a little bit about this operation. This is where we're going to get a little bit more geeky. So as mentioned, these offices are running Cisco Meraki platforms, which means we're eating what we call in American English, we're eating our own dog food. So the good, the bad, the ugly of the platforms, we get to live it. It's just like any IT organization. Now, the person that helped us build this networks is actually sitting on the other side of the planet in San Francisco, not actually here, because cloud management kind of allows you to do so. Next, this London office is what I call a medium-sized office. So it does have SD-WAN, which means we have multiple ISPs that are local. Some of them are in this room, and they just present it. They do provide us connectivity. And we house a myriad of different programs, sales, operations, marketing, engineering, a little bit of everything. So when we do a little change like adding IPv6 to the network, it is affecting many different people's functions. So we have to think about that, always purpose with function. And we're going to go a little bit deeper into this in just a bit. But from the IT's perspective, these are the high-level steps that they took to deploy V6 in this network. And we're going to take a look at a few things that I found curious about these steps. And I didn't write these steps, by the way. These were written by the IT guy. I told them, just write down what you did, and I'll unpack it a little bit. Because remember, I'm the requester here. I'm not the implementer. If I were the implementer, this would have been done like 10 years ago. So that's the guy that's been helping us behind the scenes. He's actually sitting in San Francisco. We tried to get him out here, but he couldn't make it happen. But one of the things that he told me, being that he's never touched IPv6, was the IPv6 setup was simple and it was highly automated. Well, if you think about it, V6 by itself has a lot of automation built into it, which is what we're trying to tell people, hey, take advantage of that. It's not like V4. It's a lot more simple to think about, less moving parts. It just simply works. For the most part. Next, Step 3 really caught my attention. It kind of goes back to the question that Graham just asked about, which is, how do I tinker with this at home? Because yes, this is a business here. We're having business connectivity, but yet V6 is not an option by default. By default, every service that we contract out is V4. We have to explicitly say, hey, we need V6 in order to get V6 enabled. So talking to the UK V6 Council members here, many of you guys are ISPs, how do we make V6 the default standard from now on? Is that something that we can tie business and connectivity as being V6 just being the default standard, just like we do V4? Because we found that out, yeah, the network's ready, but we just have to request it. Why? Let's just make it default on. And that's the challenge I give you guys in the UK. And this is where I'm going to go a little bit on the tangent. So as many of you guys know, Sam Knows here. So very popular here in UK. Cisco acquired them a few months ago. Now they're under ThousandEyes. Well, I took advantage of that relationship and said, hey, give me some numbers, some metrics on how we can tie user experience to V6. And this is what they came up with. So not talking about a very specific streaming video organization, but if we look at streaming video, which the UK people love to do, if we add V6 or those ISPs that actually do V6, we actually give them a better advantage. They actually have less buffering and things load a lot quicker because of the end-to-end nature of IPv6. And this is what this graph is showing. If it's darker color, that actually means it's a bad thing. There's more latency. So from a V6 perspective, it seems to be that V6 tends to be a little bit better when compared to V4, from what I understand that this numbers to be. Now, from a legal compliance perspective, I learned that in the UK, you guys have the Code of Practice of Better Broadband Speeds. It's a mouthful. What this tells me is, this doesn't call out IPv4, IPv6, it just means we're trying to improve experiences for all broadband users across the country. Well, what if we start adding V6 as a default? Could we make those experiences better? Could that really make the UK market stand out compared to other countries around the world? Just food for thought to consider. Now, going down the list, again, while my request was guest network, well, because it was easy, they got excited and they deployed it to the corporate. For me, this was welcome news. They didn't tell me, they just did it. And we found out because there's different organizations housed in here, some stuff did break, which is expected, but we went through it. I said, do not turn it off. Now that it's on, leave it on. Let's work through them. What is actually broken? Is it actually broken? And you always find the typical things like, oh, we weren't accounting for V6 because our operating systems now default to it, so our ACLs were only for V4 now. The usual stuff. Again, nothing earth-shattering, but now everybody got to live it in this building, which is a good thing. We don't learn unless we make mistakes and we suffer through it. If we would have just pulled the plug and said, hell no, your request was for the guest network, well, nobody would have learned. Now this site has been on V6 on the corporate side for 4 months now, which is pretty good. The first 2 weeks were a little tumultuous. After that, nobody's complained. So everybody's comfortable. Next, I told them, hey, we're not ready. Yes, well, we can rely on DNS v4. Let's do it with v6. Let's do it the right way. Let's do it natively. So one day we can turn off IPv4. And this is where we went to the developers and said, hey, can you give us RFC 8106? And they did in this time span. So now this is in production and you guys get to see it. So again, looking at future, because from a business perspective, these guys are now excited. IT really wants to take it to other sites. So they want to take it to other global offices. So they're now running on their own. I'm no longer in the driver's seat. Every once in a while, they hit a stumbling block, they'll call me, but for the most part, they're running with it, which is awesome, which means we can demo more stuff, not just London office. To make Jen happy in the back, we are pushing the teams to think about how do we do IPv6 only, or mostly. We'll see how we get them there, what makes more sense. We're waiting on the big one. I don't know if Tommy's in the room, but Windows, hopefully you'll have a bit good news for us later on today. That's the one that really will get us over the hump. And of course, how do we improve employee experiences? I did kind of hint that the guest network specifically was broken until last night we got it working. Well, there's not a lot of guests that come to this office. So nobody was really looking at it, hey, is it working, is it not? Until I got here last night and be like, hey, this is not working. Happy Eyeballs is not very happy. What's going on? And we figured it out. It was a typical routing problem, and nobody was looking at it. So now we're thinking, how can we actually be more proactive and monitor things that are not being used every other day? I mean, you guys know, we probably, half of us still work in our pajamas and from home. So a lot of offices are not getting used until we show up to an event like this. So now the teams are thinking of this monitoring, this experience for guests, corporate, whoever. Because guess what? The network will get used at some point. Now, let's make it real. Let's see who has actually been paying attention. So we're going to do this live. So fingers crossed. Here we go. So I am on the guest network. As you guys can see, I'm just like one of you guys. We're going to see if I actually have a v6 address, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So oops, oh, that was too much. All right, we do have a v6 address. And do we have RFC 8106 working? Let's take a look. I'm going to be lazy and be like, yep, we have DNS v6 being delivered, and we can get out, hopefully. Awesome. Now let's look at who's been paying attention in the audience now. We're going to go look at the live production network that we have here. Make this a little bit bigger. So this is the traffic you guys have been doing for the last 2 hours since you guys got here. We can see all the applications, whether they're v4, v6, on what's going through the network. Again, if you've done a Cisco Meraki network, this is very typical demo, but this is the traffic that all you guys have created in the last 2 hours. Now we can see who has IPv6 address. It seems like most machines, except 3 down here, didn't get a v6 address. Who knows why? We're not going to troubleshoot that, but to keep everybody's privacy intact, I'm just going to pick on my machine, which is this one, and we'll see a few stats on v6 here to see how real this is. So first of all, notice I am connecting over v6, as you guys can see, to the platform. I do have a v6 address. I am connecting via an access point that does have a v6 address via switch that does have a v6 address. Great. So far, so good. And I have a little bit of a history of my address log. Now, fortunately for us, Apple decided that we now have the option of how we want our v6 addresses to rotate. Well, we've kind of turned that off. They want us to be able to track us where we go. So that's why you only see the link local and the real address over here. So I don't rotate in my own office. Again, you guys have now the control. That's an OS thing developed by Apple. But pretty cool. Now, from a traffic perspective, we're actually going out this device, and I'm going to scroll through this guy really quickly. You can see v6 is actually on the WAN, and we are getting some statistics, v4 and v6, because it is the dual stack network. Next year, hopefully it'll be IPv6 mostly or only, and we'll make Jen very happy. And she'll be the face that's going to be on this presentation, and not Veronica. So, and that's all I'm going to show about this. So this is real, and you guys have been producing a lot of traffic, so awesome. Now to wrap it up here, let's close this out. So thank you for being part of the experiment. This was a year's worth of work. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. I will tell you, this is very hard to be on the requester side, not the implementer side, because you have to sit back, wait for people to ask questions, deadlines, competing priorities, and things like that. But always try to have a deadline, which was today, business priorities, and connect the dots for people. And that's how you get things across. And this applies just beyond just v6. Trust me, if you can figure that out, how to use technology in general and tie it to the business, that will make you a winner in your business. And that's how you get budgets, that's how you get things done. So let's wrap it up here. So I'm going to skip the demo. That's in case it didn't work. I was ready for a little recording. Always be prepared. So a few words of wisdom as we wrap up this little section. So first of all, I want to encourage and challenge everyone in this room. Let's make v6 your default minimum operating standard. I know probably half of you, this is preaching to the choir, but the other half, how do we make v6 the default in everything that you do? I know it's not easy, it's not hard, but it might force you to think of new ways or even have new lines of business that you can offer because of IPv6. Because remember, it's abundance of resources, it's a different way of doing things. Next, which is what I've been preaching throughout since last year because of Veronica. I give her all the credit. Connect the business or connect technology to the business. You will find a seat at the table. You will have funding. A lot of things will change if you can tie those two together. It's not that easy. You just have to think about it, challenge yourself, and be creative. And there's another talk I've given about those two things, and we can talk over pizzas if you guys want. And by all means, have that default on mindset. So if you're going to create a new service, anything from now on, how do I always have it on? I don't want to go turn it on. I just want to have it always on. And that's another challenge I'll leave you with, you guys. With that, I have any questions? I think we have about 4 minutes left. Questions? Anything you guys are curious about? Okay, I'll start here in the front. Yes, sir.
Tom Hill. Can everyone hear me? I can't hear myself. That's it.
Speak up a bit.
Okay, Tom Hill. So I've enabled IPv6 on a lot of networks over however many years. I'm a big believer in that concept of dog fooding, as you mentioned, you alluded to. The premise I've always held is that it's much more fruitful to use your colleagues as guinea pigs than it is your customers or visitors. I've always suggested this, if when we're discussing this, talking about turning something on, test it on your colleagues first. They're the ones that are going to suffer and actually give you reasonable feedback. They're not going to be put out in any way, shape, or form. So an open question, realistically, thinking about the business benefits, do you agree with that? And is it something you would have changed if you had the option to be able to do that, if you could convince people to start turning this on, inflicting it on themselves, or are we in a situation now where businesses absolutely have to have customer impact and something that's visible to the outside world to be able to justify turning any of this stuff on?
So, good question, very loaded and very opinionated. So, the answer is, I would have probably did what we did by letting them experiment and learn, because if not, they're not going to learn. If I would have done it and been here doing the maintenance window, they would probably not learn. But there is at a point that they're starting to need to look at it. How do we, the developers are creating all these new V6 features, but if they don't see them come to life, it doesn't mean anything to them. So that's one of the advantages of having this office be on V6. There are developers upstairs. So they get to see the fruits of their labor come to life, because there's one thing to develop a product and a code and actually use it and see how it comes to life, because that's how you discover bugs. That's how you discover, oh, this is what that means. I just coded it. I didn't know what it means, what the people in the ITF kind of meant, but this is what it means. So it's been a really nice journey, at least for this office. Now we're hoping to expand that to other places. Now, as far as customers are concerned, it all depends. Since we are a global organization, some customers have to do IPv6 because guess what? They're in a market that has no option. Like examples, China, India. They had no option. They started in the internet ball game really late. And if you want to create a new ISP, well, guess what? You start with V6 and V6 only because there's no V4, as an example. For other types of customers, well, they're being forced by countries. Like Veronica mentioned earlier, in the last year, the number of countries mandating IPv6 and IPv6 only has dramatically increased. And it's for various reasons. Some of them have to do with political, economical, intelligence, or economical. It's a little bit of everything. Whatever the reason, we're seeing mandates pop up with different various dates, but they're starting as early as 2 years ago. Yes.
These are all great outcomes, so don't take me wrong. Yeah. Huh? These are all great outcomes, so please don't take my question wrong. But I appreciate the fact that there's a varied business justification in each situation.
Yeah, and it's been fun because I spent since 2005, evangelizing IPv6. I was not getting anywhere for a decade because I was just like, hey, let's do V6, let's get excited, let's go break stuff. Until I started tying the knot, I started tying the dots between the business and V6 is where I was successful. And actually, before I joined Cisco, I came from university space. And the justification back then was I was bringing in grants, dollars from the National Science Foundation. So that created my business case. Now, I didn't view it that way back in the day. I didn't put in those words, but that's exactly what we were doing. We were connecting, how do we bring in more research dollars in buy new toys, which was new networking 100 gig connections in the swamp in Louisiana. I mean, who doesn't need 100 gig? While moving the needle forward in terms of research, V6, black holes, supercomputers, you name it. So that was the business case a decade ago. Now, again, it's much easier because of mandates, because there's no V4, because you want to create a new business. I mean, for me, it's been exciting the last few years. Or especially since last year, AWS started charging for V4. Well, guess what? What better justification than dollars and cents? Because now it's costing you something to maintain infrastructure in the cloud. So it's been very exciting the last year. So we had some questions in the back. Oh. Okay. Yeah, let me check on the pizza here. All right, still good.
So from what I learned today is that you don't have a mandate for IPv6 in your company worldwide. How can you talk to governments who have a mandate as a vendor if you don't have a mandate in your own company?
So the question was, how are other countries going to get a mandate? Well, I think it's starting to happen because of trickle effects. So for the longest time, we all know that the US federal government has always had a mandate for V6 and V6 only in the last few years. Well, in the last years, we've seen, so for example, in this region, the Czech Republic has always been at the forefront. We're seeing France, we're seeing Germany, we're seeing who else? In Sweden, and there's others, and it's all happening really quickly back to back. And again, what we're seeing is competition among the different entities. Again, for economic or intelligence, defense reasons. Whatever the reason is, they're starting to see what each other is doing and what the dates are they targeting and why those dates. And we've seen some of the governments even change the dates based on somebody else's dates. So it's been really interesting dynamic. And I think it's in the last year, that's why there's been that ripple effect of one after each other. Or sometimes, especially in places like France, they said, hey, we have new spectrum for 5G. Well, guess what? You can only have it if you do V6 only. So that's another economic incentive because that means a new revenue stream over new spectrum, but you have to do V6 only. That's an economic enabler, for example. And we've seen other countries like Brazil do something similar. So people are starting to see what other countries are doing and they're mimicking each other. So I expect this to probably hit home here in the UK, hopefully in the next year if they're paying attention.
So sorry, I think Wilhelm's question was, if you're dealing with countries that have a mandate, how can you talk to them if Cisco doesn't have a mandate? Or Cisco Meraki doesn't have a mandate for it internally? Because you don't have the mandate internally yet, do you?
Well, so the question, I got your question. So we don't have to necessarily have a mandate. We have to respond to the market. So if we don't respond to the market, there's a thing called market access, which means you can sell or not sell. So simple as that. If there's a mandate and our equipment cannot fill the needs of an RFP or an RFI, well, guess what? There is your business justification that you need to go develop it, which is what's been happening in the last few years, not only at Cisco, but every single other vendor in the industry has to be paying attention. They've had to implement V6 or pieces of V6 to be able to respond because it's become a market access thing. And that's how you force vendors to kind of respond. So keep putting pressure on us. That's the only way that we can do it. So I think we're at time. Thank you.